there's too much of a lag time between figuring out something is not really benefiting kids and getting it out of classrooms. Like, the famous one everybody uses now is learning styles. But guess what? Productive struggle is learning styles.
Welcome back, everyone, to Progressively Incorrect. My name is Dr. Zach Groshell, and in this episode, we will be exploring the Math Wars and MTSS with Dr. Amanda VanDerHeyden. This episode is brought to you by John Catt Educational, which publishes some of the best books in education, including the brand new USA edition of Walkthroughs, 5-Step Guides to Building Great Teaching by Tom Sherrington and Oliver Caviglioli. I've been using the walkthrough books as an instructional coaching tool for several years, and this USA edition is sort of like the best of all three of the UK books compiled into one. It is a fantastic resource, and if you want to hear more about it from Tom and Oliver, I recommend you checking out my interview with them on the Season 3 premiere of this show. So, without further ado, let's head on over to this very amusing and fast-paced discussion with the always perceptive Dr. Amanda VanDerHeyden. I'm here with a very special guest, Dr. Amanda VanDerHeyden, and we're going to be talking all things math. I hope we can talk about MTSS and some behavioral interventions. How are you doing, Amanda?
I'm great. I'm excited and honored to be invited on your podcast.
So, what do you do for listeners? I'm really familiar with your work. I use Mendeley for my research, so I have like a huge folder that you're tagged in. You have a lot of great research output. What do you do?
What do? I just do what I like to do. Isn't that the dream? Like, I am living the dream. If I'm curious about something, I can have a question about could this really benefit a kid? And then I'm so curious to build it out and study it and find exactly in what ways it does benefit. What's the cost of that benefit? Is there a point of diminished returns, right? What are the contingencies or, the context around how it works or what makes it work, what makes it a good fit. And that's the kind of work I like to do. So I think that just led me to sort of build solutions. I've built screening measures. I've built tons of math assessments, and of course, intervention, and then spring math. So.
Wow, that's quite a resume. And this next part of this might feel a little bit like you're my therapist because
I am not qualified. I am a psychologist. I will say I am a psychologist, but I am really not qualified unless you have a math problem.
Well, I'll give you the story is that yesterday and over the course of several years, I've been involved. Well, I've had very bad professional development imposed upon me. In terms of, very kind of opinion-based, ideological PD. And yesterday, actually, I spoke up. You don't want to be that person. You don't want to be that person who ruins the whole thing. But I spoke up and I said, this seems to conflict with the evidence. Let me tell you what happened. So, the whole PD started with the presenter telling this story. And the story was like, as a student, I got really great grades in math. I could memorize procedures. The teachers loved me. But then when I got to college and I started rubbing elbows with these pre-med students in calculus, basically I figured out that my traditional education of memorizing things by rote basically had failed me, and I didn't understand. I didn't have that deep conceptual understanding. And so the conclusion was everyone across the United States should ditch these old ways, right, and go towards productive struggle type.
Based on an anecdote, a personal testimony, an observation that could never be experimental. It's only correlational. And also, I can think of 4,000 other reasons that this person could have been in trouble in math, right? Yeah. And that's not fair. I will say in my entire career, I have mostly had the great good fortune to not have to be subjected to that type of thing. That would be hard to sit through and not call it out. And, I live in the South, the southeastern part of the United States. You can't really call people out. It's considered so very rude. But I think we should be saying things. We should speak up when we see that, right?
Well, and like, what one of the things that came up was that, the goal of math really isn't knowing how to do the math. It's not what we can observe because or measure. That's just tests. I
Oh,
mean,
so what is it? Is it what we believe? Is it how we feel? I mean, come on. That is nonsense. And I think what's interesting to me is this debate is dominated by a certain demographic, in my opinion. Go talk to, like, I want to say people in other fields, like in STEM fields, people who work, go talk to people who are physicians, physical therapists, nurses, speech therapists, history professors. I mean, I could name journalists. I mean, people that you could speak to who would say, oh, well, children do need to master the fundamentals. And it really is important. If procedural understanding is not important in math, how does that work? Because there are correct and incorrect answers that will cause the bridge to hold or fail, right? And we need to be about teaching the children those mechanics, because that is the entry point into mathematical thinking. And so this kind of zealotry, I'm going to put that in the land of zealotry, which is somebody pontificating about their personal experience. Like, that is really not relevant to a professional development conversation, to tell you the truth.
And I have trouble myself defining conceptual understanding because it's sort of used as that's the good type of understanding. The presenters
Right.
themselves never clarify what they mean. And
Yeah.
it's put in opposition to procedural understanding, which I think we can all imagine are like actually the steps of an example or the steps of a problem.
Right.
Like, what is the difference here, and how do you measure these two things? I've always been
Well,
curious.
I mean, I think the difference has been somewhat overstated. The reality is understanding is understanding. And we know there's clearly a bidirectional relationship between what we call procedural skill development and what we call conceptual understanding. And I agree with you. One of the biggest errors that I see that sort of comes from the other side, we'll say, in math, is they don't even define their terms, right? And so then you're having a fight about jargon that nobody's bothered to define. So I actually think John Starr really led on this in his seminal paper. And he did attempt to articulate that there is an awful lot more to procedural skill development and procedural knowledge than what has been sort of portrayed and run with by folks who write about it in a very theoretical way. Okay. And John Starr's work led to, I think, a series of beautiful empirical studies, nicely summarized in Bethany Riddle Johnson's 2017 summary review paper. And then you can go read all the papers she writes about. She cites them all in that paper. And, it becomes really clear that original positioning of there's this thing called procedural skill, and then there's this other thing called conceptual understanding, that's overplayed, right? I mean, they feed each other in a bidirectional way. And how in the world do you really teach conceptual understanding distinct from the operation within which you're doing that work? It's a big mistake to try to quote unquote build conceptual understanding over here as though let me give you a good example, right? And you can cut this if I get too long-winded, but place value is a great example, because teachers may Google, okay, what's the best way to teach this to second or third grade kids? And what they will inevitably run into, and it will appear on a year-end test, most likely, is the columns and then the little blocks, and they have to count and say how many hundreds, how many tens, how many ones, right? That is a really artificial way to portray place value understanding. The way it is really relevant to a second grader is in creating equivalent quantities within the context of operations. Most critically, for kids that age, I would say addition and subtraction. So their ability to take a 10 and identifying the remaining ones to create an equivalent numerical expression. For example, this is one of the skills we target. 34 minus 8 equals 30 minus 8 minus 4, right? So they have to be able to take, decompose one of the numbers, right? that can be measured in the context of their understanding of addition and subtraction. It becomes more useful to them. It becomes more meaningful to them, rather than having them count a set of columns. And that, talk about rote performance, that doesn't mean anything to a kid. And kids will always find, humans will always find the shortcut to get the answer without having to think. But that's just the sign of like bad instruction. That is not sort of the purview of procedural skill development. That's the mistake. Do you follow me?
Totally. And, and I brought up in my when I stood up against the, the presenter, I brought up the Riddle Johnson series of articles, at least what I have at least 3. And I showed the iterative model. I showed like how the arrows kind of go, and I did this as a visual. And you know what? The answer was, that's your research, but I have. And then she held up the NCTM's chapter about conceptual understanding.
Oh, I was sent to that chapter. It rambles. It's a terrible chapter. Like, look, I've been an editor in our field, and I was an associate editor for over 10 years with 3 different journals. So I'm still active on a number of review boards. I've been doing that work, forever, since I was, I guess 25, and I'm 50. And, I would not have published that chapter, period. It was poorly done. It went on. And I can remember the guy who sent it to me. He's a big shot at NCTM. And I ran into him on Twitter, and he was like, here is the authoritative. I said, send me, I will read it. And I read it, and I thought, did you read this? Because it's really terrible. Yeah.
It's too bad. And, and I name dropped, I said, right now we're doing a lot of the science of reading. I think it would be great if we started turning towards the people who are supporting the science of math. And immediately this was the response. Immediately was, the people involved with the science of math do not have a research background.
Which is crazy to me, because I think the rest of like what we would say is that's the whole reason we exist, because the people saying productive struggle is the way to, we're all like, we are all actual researchers. We all said, oh my God, how did we miss that research? Where do we find it? Then we went and read it. And then we said, holy smokes, this is actually not research. Okay. And it's just sort of amazing. Like, I do think there is something to, we have a stewardship responsibility in the work that we do. And we don't have a right to just do what we like, or what we heard some thought leaders say, or we think might be a good idea, because it becomes tantamount to unconsented experimentation on children in schools. Every year is a 1-year instructional opportunity to either deliver the understandings that children need to have success going forward, or at least not have a barrier going forward, or not. And so you really do not have the luxury of being able to just say, well, at our school, we do this because we're so committed to this, above and beyond how much it benefits the very kids in front of us or not. And all you have to do is be a little bit curious, step back, look at the NAEP data, National Assessment of Educational Progress, completely flat. Since my son's birth in 2003, he's out of high school, in college. And the average 4th grader is still non-proficient, totally flat, no improvement. Like, that's not okay. That is unacceptable. We can do better than that. And the thing I always say to the other side is, look, why would you be opposed to doing something that has been tested? Let it be 30 minutes of your day. And then guess what? If you do it well, then you can do other things. You have the flexibility to orchestrate a beautiful productive struggle lesson if you would like. I just think so. I think there's such a profound lack of understanding instructional design and the science of how humans learn, the science of instruction. And I think if people understood that, then we could stop fighting about, because it's not about I have an allegiance to a tactic or not. And I do say all the time, productive struggle, it just does not belong as an acquisition tactic. And this is where teachers are taught to use it. This is where they try to use it. And it's sad to me, because I think these teachers are experiencing a failed result from that. and teachers want to be effective with their students. That's my experience. So if I can talk a teacher into just shifting to move productive struggle over to a generalization opportunity, and that means I give that opportunity instructionally when the children in front of me are fluent with the skill.
And I've I've observed a lot of, because I'm an instructional coach, I've observed a lot of productive struggle lessons. I've even had ones that were designed, like probably a lot of work went into it as model productive struggle lessons to sort of convince the people, with in attendance with clipboards. Um, every single one I have seen, I've not, you'd think, well, at least there's be this really productive buzz around the room and kids will be like having a good time. And at least it will feel really mathematical and enjoyable. Every single one, including the one I saw yesterday, were kids fighting with each other, talking about something else, going under their desks to look at their phones, kids pulling out just the one thing they know, like a right angle looks like an L, and that's the only thing they bring to bear in that class. Because it's just sad.
It's bad instruction. Period. It's bad instruction. And honestly, it's like people are selecting the instruction based on what the adults think is cool, rather than whether or not it actually works for the students in front of them. And that's why I frankly don't understand the level of hostility and sort of animosity in the debate. And I would say, the science of, it's funny because I got into a little debate with a guy on Twitter who makes a living promoting inquiry-based instruction. So no wonder he does not like me. But he basically said that people like me did not understand instructional science because, and I thought, oh my gosh, wow. How do you even have that debate on Twitter? It's just not, and it's not respectful, right? But the first thing they do is personally attack you. So one of the things, what I was really going to say is the science of reading people are our colleagues. I have published in reading a lot. Okay. I still do quite a bit. And, because the science of instruction is the science of instruction, and I still do some research in that space, although I prefer to work in math. But my point is, these are not like separate bubbles. We are often the same people doing this type of work. And I will say we should always be humble and have this humility of, we could also turn into zealotry. We have to also be open to that, every idea needs to be tested. We don't have a self-righteousness about the way we approach the work. And I do think the science of math leaders that I'm familiar with, that is their approach. These are humble people trying to do work that genuinely benefits children. And I can speak for myself and my closest colleagues who were leaders in this movement, that we got into it because we couldn't go out and do good things for schools and kids because we kept getting in these philosophical wars around, timed assessment causes anxiety. And it's not true. And oh, by the way, like to your point, productive struggle should cause anxiety. But they don't seem to worry about that. But what's that about?
Well, I wonder, like what, I'm just a lowly middle leader teacher, right? And it doesn't seem to matter that I have the letters to my name either, right? I'm someone who's there to sit and get and lay low while the presentation's going. To kind of wrap up this segment of the talk, what is your advice for teachers they've come by trial and error to explicit teaching and structured systematic math instruction, and they have to live in this world that is crazy and the math wars that is sort of over on top of them?
Welcome to education, right? Your work is really important. What better place to be than exactly on the front line? You're right. There's a bigger context. There's a bigger battle. There are probably 25 or 30 kids who are counting on you. So do what works. If something doesn't sit with your gut, if you hear something in a training that you're jazzed about and you want to try it, be responsive to what happens when you do. If your children are not mastering subtraction 0 to 9, it is not because they cannot master subtraction 0 to 9, okay? I'll paraphrase Fred Keller, who wrote a seminal paper in 1968. And in this paper, he said, I'm paraphrasing, but the learner is never wrong. If I have instructed and you didn't learn, then guess what? By definition, I didn't instruct. I didn't teach you because you didn't learn. Okay. So it's a powerful way to reframe our job. And what I'll say about that is what we tend to do in our world is we go, oh, the learner is not learning. What's wrong with the learner? And what we should, and I'm a school psychologist, what we should be saying is the learner is not learning. What's wrong with the instruction? So teachers, you have the most important job. You are the whole reason we exist. Everything we want to bring to bear as a tool is about helping you deliver better instruction. So just watch what unfolds. It's okay to try something, but make sure it works. And don't be so quick to think that when students are not getting it or they're slow to get it, that is about the student. It's always about your instruction. And you do have a responsibility to choose a more efficient method when more efficient methods exist, because you are always robbing from, there's always an opportunity cost to what we choose to do instructionally.
And what do you think about teachers who are given structured materials, but the structured materials point towards guide towards more inquiry-based math? Like
Yeah.
they like, we're going to start with try it, connect it, and finally at the end, we're going to use some other euphemism that sort of means explain it, you know? And like,
Right.
what do you do when you're in that situation?
Yeah, I mean, look here, bad instructions, bad instructions, bad instruction. And I get versions of that question all the time because, you know, in math, it's a little bit worse than reading in that there are no math curricula that are particularly good. They all have weak effect sizes on student achievement. So yes, you are handed a curricula typically. That is something, or curriculum that you need to use in your class. But also you have a bigger responsibility, which is to make sure that the children in front of you master what they need to master. And there's no substitute for understand. If you can't articulate if you don't as a teacher know, all right, what skills do I need my kids to master this year? Have I mapped them onto an instructional calendar in a way that makes sense? Do I know what mastery looks like? Look, you know, I see this all the time with principals. So I'll ask principals, hey, oh, by the way, what's your third grade math proficiency? And they don't know. You cannot effectively lead a school toward a better result if you don't know what your baseline is. Okay. I think sometimes with teachers, to your point, you say, what is? When you say great, you know, excellent conceptual understanding, what do you mean by that? What does that look like? If you can't see it, touch it, feel it, describe it, you'll never attain it. So that's a really important thing for teachers to hold themselves accountable to. You know, don't fall into this trap of like, people will say deep understanding and everybody in the room will nod as though that means something. Well, what does that mean? Let's talk about that.
Excellent. I mean, I think we should talk about MTSS and perhaps some of the things underneath that umbrella. I personally was trained when RTI was on everybody's lips, and I remember the teacher, the professor I had even had like like a pyramid on her shirt. She came in like, you know,
who was that? I probably never. Who was the professor?
Well, do you know
You
Marcy
might not want to
Stein?
say. But
Yeah. Do you know Marcy Stein from
okay.
yeah. I'm not sure if she wore the shirt, but she was, for me, the professor that stuck out in my mind is the only one making sense of the whole
You were very lucky to have her.
yeah. But you know, RTI was what we all talked about, and I don't know if people really understood its use. And now we have a new set of letters. Kind of, what is MTSS?
Yeah, okay, so I think MTSS is RTI grown up. All right. So now when people talk about, especially in school psychology, and I've written a couple books on this, so I feel like I'll speak as an authority a little bit, but like what we would say is MTSS refers to the framework, right? And it includes behavior and academic content areas, and it includes universal screening and identification of systematic risk, which includes program evaluation and incrementally more intensive instruction and database decision making to determine when you need an eligibility evaluation, and the results of that eligibility evaluation can be informed by that. But RTI we now use to basically capture the student's response to intervention, basically as part of that database decision-making process. So like, for example, a child could be in MTSS for math or reading, whatever, and you use the resulting data that came from maybe a tier 2 or even an individual intervention to decide whether or not you need to conduct an evaluation. The data that you use that informs the referral for an eligibility evaluation, that's the RTI.
Perfect. And so like for me, like RTI, it makes sense as like a description of differentiation. Like when I'm like, differentiation is another one of those weasel words,
I know,
but
it's
when I look at that,
operationalized.
when
Yes.
I when I look at that pyramid, I go, so if I'm going to create small groups, it's going to be based off of the students not learning what I taught in the core lesson. But
Yeah.
I think sometimes we take tier 1 and we just say, hey, explicit teaching is for tier 2 and special ed, and tier 1, that's where we do the inquiry and the discovery. And I don't know what you think about that.
Substitute the words effective and poor instruction. So here's what I don't understand. This has always been this way. This is not new territory. You know, the original direct instruction folks were so badly treated. Doug Carnine became a meditation teacher. I don't know if you know that. It makes a lot of sense to me. And actually, I highly recommend his meditation book because he wrote it like a behavior analyst. So he really teaches you how to meditate. It's very well done. He coined a term called kindfulness, in part probably because he was so badly treated, you know, and what they did had, I mean, they had heads and shoulders above, like dramatically stronger effects than any other tactic considered in the follow follow-up study, and people just ignored it. People just believed it was bad for kids. Somehow it needed a PR makeover. And then I think to some extent explicit instruction has been an effort in that direction to give it a new name, sort of relaunch it. And it's funny because this misunderstanding about explicit instruction continues to chase explicit instruction. And I think it's because people don't know what it is, including many of the people giving professional development who say it doesn't work. They don't actually know what it is. And I promise you, explicit instruction is used to train surgeons. Explicit instruction is used to train accountants. Anything for which very specific behaviors need to be conducted to arrive at certain results, you have to show somebody what successful performance looks like. You need to show them what are the limits of that, what are the ways in which your response could change that would make it your response incorrect. That's called discrimination. That's the actual label for it from behavior analysis. Like, these are not new concepts, you know? So that's why I won't call fluency automaticity. I won't, because fluency goes all the way back to B.F. Skinner. And fluency is the birthplace of curriculum-based measurement, which was the subsequent birthplace of MTSS. And everything cognitive that has come into that space has come in after the fact. So I just think people do not understand it. And there's always, you know, think about behavior analysis more generally. You know, people didn't love B.F. Skinner either. And remember, he wrote that book, Beyond Freedom and Dignity. And he wrote it because of the exact same kind of pushback of like adults, you know, other adults. Meanwhile, his work literally set people free from restraints, from chemical and physical restraint. And what they said is his work was dehumanizing. And the people who said it did not understand. It is not dehumanizing, you know, to identify functions of behavior and provide ample access to reinforcement contingent upon specific adaptive behaviors. Like, this is what we do all the time. There's real value in that particular science that gets sort of diminished and blown off. And I'll never understand it because in many ways it's changed the world.
And it's weird because it's like the textbooks are usually pretty clear. I'm talking about the psychology 101 textbooks, right?
Yeah.
They're usually pretty clear that like most psychologists take an eclectic approach, and it almost always clarifies that. But then it just feels like there's two things in opposition: constructivism, and they skip over anything in the middle and go straight to in opposition with behaviorism as the
Right.
bad word. It's very strange.
It is so strange. And of course, I will say, I mean, I'm a behavior analyst. That's my training and my background. But I will say, like, I'm not dogmatic. I really am not. I'm genuinely curious. And it doesn't have to fit my theory. If it can work and it gets a better result, then I say that to my team all the time. We're doing this, research is happening. And if we learn better, we will do better. We will change what we do. I mean, to me, that is sort of like evidence-informed practice. That's what we should be doing. Because it's not like we knew everything we needed to know in the 1950s when B.F. Skinner made these very important discoveries. Discoveries are always unfolding in real time. And science, my old professor, John Northup, said, yeah, that was his question to me, my qualifying exams. My only question was, Amanda, how does science progress? And I'm like, oh my God, that's a really big question. And I said, replication. And he said, what kind? And I said, systematic. And he's like, that's what I was hoping you would say. And I get it now. I mean, now that I'm older, I really get it. Like, good research will replicate. It will hold up, and it will lead to a pattern of findings that we should all in education be faster to embrace and deploy. There's too much of a lag time between figuring out something is not really benefiting kids and getting it out of classrooms. Like, the famous one everybody uses now is learning styles. But guess what? Productive struggle is learning styles. It is, and we all know it, and it has been for, a couple decades. And it makes me sad because, like, I literally remember in 1996 sitting in my grad school classes being taught learning styles are not real. There is no data to support aptitude by treatment interactions. Here are all the research articles on it. And I spent most of my career, like, it's only in the last few years that people say, oh yeah, that's a myth. That's too long.
Well, like, you have this tier one that's using explicit instruction, which by the way, there's some antecedent strategies in there, right? If you explain up front what is to come, you're going to cut down on negative behaviors, unwanted behaviors. If you speak at a brisk pace, get lots of opportunities to respond, you're going to, have this interaction. They can't stop paying attention, and you're breaking things into small chunks. I mean,
it's like a volley.
Yeah.
People think, okay, so the person who did your PD yesterday, probably if you said to that person, what is explicit instruction? She would present it. She might even use these little catchphrases like sage on a stage and talking at students. If you've ever watched really well done explicit instruction, go to Morningside Academy, right? That's not what it looks like. Children are actively responding. They're responding every time. To your point, they want to respond. The momentum is about responding. And, Engelman wrote beautiful papers on how important control of the task is at the antecedent level. There's tons of research in psychology and school psychology in particular. I'm thinking of like Chris Skinner's great research. I mean, I've been able to do some research in this area too, but very specific task arrangements. There are dimensions of the task that are all of that is antecedent that can be systematically adjusted based on the science of how learning happens. And this is what teachers profoundly misunderstand, right? Because what you do in terms of antecedents, behaviors, and consequences differs based on whether you are trying to establish a new understanding with your students, you're trying to build fluency for something they already know how to do, or you're trying to give them generalization opportunities for something that they are at mastery for. And teachers love to do the third piece. The problem that they make is they design their, let's call it generalization instruction. They don't call it that, but let's call it that. They put a lot of thought into that. That's their group projects, their applied work. They like that. That is not where new skill understanding can live. It's where free learning can happen, if you have done the work to build acquisition and fluency before you move into that opportunity. So I don't think teachers understand that. And explicit instruction then gets demonized, but to your point, it is not as simple as, of course, we all try to talk about things in a simple way to get teachers to try it. But behavioral science is extremely powerful in not just the, sit back and think about what should my lesson look like today, but actually in the live volleys that go on in the classroom. There is an antecedent that comes from you as a teacher. There is a child response. The response can be correct and incorrect, but it could also be high quality, lower quality, complete, incomplete. I mean, there are a lot of ways you can evaluate that our math friends would appreciate. It doesn't have to be so binary, but based on that student response, so that's antecedent behavior, then the consequence is either going to be corrective feedback, and antecedent support added to the representation of the task. If the response is meeting your goals, whatever, in terms of quality, completeness, accuracy, then you will affirm it and advance the task difficulty. And that goes on 5,000 times in a classroom all day long. But you can literally stand in the back of the room and measure it. Some people will call them opportunities to respond. You can also call them complete learning trials.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, and where does PBIS like fall into all of this? Because we are a PBIS school, and I'm sort of charged with PBIS, but there are.
Oh my God, it's the same science. This is what makes me laugh. Like the guy on Twitter demonized me, and he was like, well, the science of reading is really good, but like the science of math is crap. I'm like, we're the same people. It's the same science, dude. Okay, so here's what I'll say about PBIS, because that really came to be while I was growing up in this field. And I'll tell you what, it was a very successful, I mean, I hope the PBIS people won't get mad at me because I do adore their work, but I'm going to say, coming out of a behavior analysis program with Joe Witt and George Knoll and Dorothy Lehrman and John Northup, those were all my professors in grad school. They successfully PR'd, gave a PR makeover to applied behavior analysis for disruptive behavior in schools. And they attached some kind of, at the time, novel metrics, novel methods of keeping track of, who's responding, not responding. But, this was like Hill Walker's great work in the early days, and his work in universal screening in detection of, need for behavior support. So to me, MTSS has always included behavior. And in fact, in my early days, we were working with the STEEP model. That was Joe Witt's model of, we didn't even call it RTI back then. I think we called it problem validation screening, something like that. Problem solving, but very early model of RTI. And we would actually go in and screen the school in reading, writing, and math in a given day, but we also coded for behavior. So what we would do, it was really a beautiful model in that we could go into the classroom and we had these controlled math, reading, and writing tasks, which gave us transition opportunities. And we had the opportunity to observe the entire class, but also any target child that a teacher had a concern about. So what we would do at the end of that is we could characterize the child's behavior relative to same class peers, given controlled academic tasks, reading, writing, math. So was it only in one, because if it occurred just in math and their performance is weak in math, then you could speculate that it is an escape maintained behavior related to the difficulty in the math work. And then part of your intervention should involve improving their math skill. We wrote a paper that really summarizes all of this called Troubleshooting Behavioral Interventions in 2004. I'd be happy to send it to you if you'd like to read it.
I have it.
Okay. I mean, to me, that's why I say behavior is behavior. So for me, if it's solving math problems correctly or in-seat behavior, out-of-seat behavior, it's behavior is behavior. You have to know how to do it. You have to be cued to do it. You have to be supported to do it. That's all antecedent. You have to be watched while you do it, so we know you did it. And then you have to, on the backside of that, get something good out of it, right? Like it works for you, so you like it. It gives you something that makes you, that reinforces that behavior that we're after, so that you'll continue to do it. So PBIS, I love, and I think they very successfully did a PR makeover. We could have learned from them. They ought to consult specifically on that.
Well, when I talk to teachers too, who they struggle with this, with using it. Mainly, like I feel like in general, their praise to reprimand ratio, or their praise to the ratio is extremely low in general. So giving them tickets, or giving them a token economy, giving them online platform, whatever we're using at the time, like that, it doesn't encourage what should be like in the teacher's toolkit, which is constant positive praise.
Right.
But the other piece that is people that is up to debate is, how does punishment sort of get in, how is it involved, and sort of how successful is punishment is always a question people ask me.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what is interesting to me is, I don't believe you can ever treat disruptive behavior in a classroom distinct from instructional opportunity. It is not fair to me. Okay, so do you remember how people would articulate the difference between behavior modification and applied behavior analysis? And behavior modification is the application of something that will change behavior without regard to function. So like punishment as a suppression technique would be more, behavior modification, okay? But that being said, punishment means that when you apply it, or you get a reduced occurrence on the other side, right? And there are ways that you can do that a lot of people wouldn't even call it punishment, but even though technically it is. So let me give you an example. In academics, overcorrection is a very powerful punishment strategy. You know what overcorrection involves? Simply rereading a phrase 3 times. Okay, nobody cried over that. Like, that's not painful. It takes less than 2 seconds, but it is a very powerful way to reduce the future occurrence of similar errors. So we use it. We embed that when we need it, when we have a high error rate. If we don't have a high error rate, we don't use it. This is the thing I think that people misunderstand. So teachers just want to know, give me the list of effective things to do. The science doesn't work that way. There is a real science to how behavior unfolds in a classroom, and it's your job to understand that, so that you can be more thoughtful about what strategies are needed when, given what's in front of you. And I think it's easy to master. It's not impossible. I hope I'm not making it sound super complicated, but I just don't think you want to ever go into a classroom where you have a lot of disruptive behavior and say, I'm going to fix this separate from the academic program that's unfolding, right? And I'll give you an example. I was in a school. I go to schools all the time. People often say that. There's somebody in Michigan sat on a state listserv. I mean, she's one of the math people, and she does not like me. And she said that I had 0 instructional experience. I've been a district leader. I was actually responsible for math improvement district-wide, and I was the leader at the table for that for 3 years. So, you just have to they will say anything about you. That's just what they do. But my point is, I'm in this classroom in Arizona, and this teacher did have a high praise ratio. I mean, right? She did that. She had that nailed, but her class was so off the wall. Like, this is a 1st grade class, and at any given time, 50% of kids were out of their seats during class-wide intervention. I'm like, well, this is not a class-wide intervention problem. This is oh my gosh, we gotta fix this. Like, how does this sweet teacher show up every day and continue to have a 5-to-1 praise ratio? Because I counted. I mean, I couldn't believe it. I mean, there was a kid at one point walking around the room with a box over his head, like an empty goldfish box. And I'm like, actually, like, in this context, a more effective model exists for this teacher. But it's like what she learned in her PD was just praise, 5-to-1, and that's all she knew to do. God bless her. And she was trying, but it was not working, right? Yeah.
And that you're talking my situation in a lot of ways, right? Like, so you end up telling someone this is a good idea, worked examples or whatever, praise and whatever. You explain this idea, and then you see this mutation occur, the lethal mutation idea, where you went, There were a lot of moving, interacting pieces that should have gone into this, but you tried to nail this one thing in isolation and it didn't go over. And now you sort of lose credibility in some sense, right? You start to not believe that any of this training can really matter,
Right. Yeah. And it's because they don't understand the science. That's it. Right. And then I think sometimes when people don't understand the science, then they say things like, does the science really matter? And can you ever really measure improved math performance? And the answer to that is a resounding yes. Ask anybody who goes out, graduates from college, is gainfully employed. That answer is yes.
So I want to talk to you about class-wide intervention. It's the first time I heard the idea of like tier 1.5, right? We're talking about this 3-tier triangle, this pyramid that includes tier 1 is 80%. You have the tier 2, a smaller percentage of maybe like small group targeted instruction. At the very top, we know a very small percentage of students are receiving more intensive one-on-one interventions. But then there's this 1.5 idea that maybe is new to everyone listening right now.
Yeah, which is amazing to me because it's not really a new idea. And I need to say it's not my idea. Like I was inspired. I knew I needed to solve a core instructional problem in math. Okay. And so I went to the literature. Okay, what good, let me consume, let me see what's out there. And all I could find really at that time was Charlie Greenwood's class-wide peer tutoring model, which was not specific to math. I mean, he did it in math and he did it in spelling and he did it in reading. And I think he even did it in writing a little bit, and, his colleagues and grad students and whatever. And those were not new data. And I don't know if you know Charlie Greenwood. I don't know if you know his name, but he was one of those, such a brilliant researcher. In effect, it was almost like, my favorite study of his is almost like a quasi RCT, which I know is, you can't have those two things live in the same sentence, but like he did an RCT almost like before anybody was doing RCTs. All right. In that he really selected beautiful comparison groups and he measured everybody. And so he didn't really have random assignment because you couldn't, because it was based on your achievement level and other risk factors. But it was so beautifully done. And what he very beautifully articulated was that his theory of action for class-wide peer tutoring was about a high dose of opportunities to respond given the right instructional level task materials. That's it. In a nutshell, people profoundly misunderstand what it is. They often think it's about how well one of the peers explains to another peer, and it is not. It has nothing to do with that. The science of it is like something I'm 20 years in on it, and I marvel at the science that makes it tick. And so I guess for me, when I started building that in 2002, deployed it across a district. And we took that little district from middle of the pack in the state to rank order position 1. And in the first year, we cut their LD rate from 6% to 3.5%. And they've stayed there ever since, really, in terms of their achievement. They're still rank order 1 or 2 in the state and have been since I left in 2005. So, and we saw a lot of other benefits like cost reduction and disproportionality improvements and all of that. So that was extremely rewarding work. And then as I went out and tried to train other systems to, if you're doing nothing else, if you have a high base rate of risk when you screen, you have to have class-wide intervention. You can't decide who needs tier 2 or tier 3 if you don't have class-wide intervention. And I began to publish like crazy. And I didn't always put the words class-wide intervention in the keywords. And if you look up my research, if you look for spring math, you'll find our website, but you're not going to find that in my research papers because I don't do that kind of research. Like the kind of research I like to do is really advancing what we know as a field, that anybody can take what you've learned and benefit their practice. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So for me, I found class-wide intervention to give me this tremendously powerful effect that I didn't really totally expect when I was 30 years old doing that work. I thought that I really wanted to build tier 3 interventions, and I wanted to study tier 3 interventions. And what happened is we had so much mathematical risk in the system that I couldn't figure out who my tier 3 kids were. So I said, let me build this first as a way to get to my tier 3 kids. Well, let me tell you, in that district, Vail, Arizona, I don't mind saying who it was, they wouldn't mind it either. We only ever had 2% of the screened population require a tier 3 intervention. So my dreams of studying tier 3 interventions were gone. You can't do it when you only got a sample of 2% of the entire screened population. That's not practical. But what I then became really like on fire for is building out class-wide intervention. And we've studied all, it is also just a beautiful frame within which to do research. That's very interesting research, right? Because you control all these things around it, and you can study all kinds of questions, like things we learn every day, like which skills are universally more challenging for kids to master.
So what would this look like in a typical classroom schedule? Like, let's say that we're talking about either elementary or middle school, and we're talking about, like, does this add to the timetable? Is this taking place of core on level instruction? Like, what does this look like?
Because like what we say and what's true is a little different. So, I mean, this is what I can tell you. A veteran teacher in the elementary grades, it's 12 minutes per day. Non-veteran teacher, and this is what we say 15 to 20 minutes, but we want you to do it 4 to 5 days per week. Ideally, we know, because we studied, I mean, just every which way, it is more effective when children receive class-wide math intervention in the context of their core instructional groupings, which ideally are not tracked. Okay, we don't want homogeneous groupings. We want heterogeneous core instructional groupings to the greatest extent possible. And there's a reason for that. I can articulate it if I'm way down in the weeds, but we always say it's an add-on. So my solution to being that, your question about you're the frontline teacher and you have all these things imposed on you, but you need to do what works. I feel that way too in school psychology. There's all these things that are imposed on us, but I need to do what works. So MTSS has been my saving grace for that. And that's how I leverage everything. So what you say is it's a supplement, right? It's an add-on, but also at the end of the day, if we're being honest with each other, because most teachers will say, oh my gosh, how do I find 15 minutes to add on? And the real truth of the matter is that is really hard to say. And you can't usually say this to a brand new school. I bet you could repurpose 15 to 20 minutes of what you're doing in your core, and we'll get you a better result. Yeah. And I think part of why class-wide math intervention works so well, first of all, I conceive of it based on Charlie's original kind of thinking that this is a opportunities to respond dosage issue. To me, that, and he didn't position it this way. So I say we don't use his model. We are not identical to that model, but we were inspired by that model. And so based on Charlie's work, I think of class-wide math intervention as being a standard protocol, whole class fluency building intervention. If we give it to you and your median score is in the frustrational range, meaning you're not ready for fluency building and you need acquisition support, then we will enable a whole class acquisition lesson with scripted activities to build conceptual understanding, which I can define because I don't do things I can't define, that then the teacher can deliver and come back to the class-wide intervention for fluency building once children are accurate and independent.
Perfect. And for the majority of these materials, are they only math facts, or is this possible with other types of materials?
Yeah, so I mean, we're mostly not math facts. That's also so when I started doing this work, I went to buy what I needed, and you couldn't buy it. Didn't exist. Nobody had done it. And I sort of began to suspect, another research team that's been very personally influential to me, and they're also just very kind people. I don't know if people always say that about them because they are so strong and good at what they do that they can be a little intimidating. But I'm talking about, of course, Doug and Lynn Fuchs, and they have their PALS model, which is different from how I do it, but also I think inspired by Charlie Greenwood's fine work. And I love their work and their research, and I follow that. But I think at the end of the day, class-wide intervention works because it is a fluency building, time-controlled, task controlled. It's the sequencing of the tasks. So you don't introduce the more complex task until the median has reached mastery on the prerequisite task. That's part of your skill sequencing. But for us, when I began to look for materials and measures, what I found, I decided I didn't think would work. And I took because I tried it. I tried the MComps and the MCAPs, and I had the hubris of youth that maybe I could just do it better. So I tried to build some. Big fail. And I rapidly figured out that I felt, we need mastery measurement. If I'm driving very particular MTSS decisions, and like Pal's and Charlie's model predated MTSS. But I came at it more of a, MTSS, you have to have a measure. You have to have a set of decision rules. Otherwise, how can you articulate and replicate your IV, your independent variable? That's part of your independent variable. So all of that is a long-winded way to say we are mostly not basic facts. So we have measures and actual intervention protocols attached to things like solving for slope, solving for missing value or missing variable with a percentage problem, creating equivalent proportions with a number missing in any position, converting decimals to fractions, fractions to decimals. Like that, I don't mind sending you our whole list, but we target 145 skills from numeracy to algebra. So basic facts, there's not that many if you think about it, right?
Yeah, exactly. Wow, that definitely clarifies it for me. Where can people go who are listening now to kind of find out more about these products, Spring Math, and how would they get in touch with you?
I think just go to the website, springmath.com. And I will say Paul Meiskens, who's an original CBM guy, he worked with Stan Dino and Doug Marston. And Paul is like 7 feet tall, so it's really hard to, I'm tiny, I'm 4'11". So it's really hard to fit us in the same frame, but I love him. He's brilliant. I don't think I would want to do this work without him. He's always been right by my side with Spring Math in particular. But he and I wrote a book, and it is available on our website, and it's free. And it is not a marketing ploy. You don't have to, we don't capture anything about you. You don't have to enter anything about yourself. It simply is a link that opens a PDF that you can print if you'd like to. And I think they are going to have a booth at NASP this year. And I think we're going to give away some print some copies for people. I like a printed copy. Hopefully they'll give me one. Maybe they'll give me one. But
That's great. That's great. Well, and I hope people that were listening, they kind of got two different flavors in this one. I think there was just me talking about terrible math ideas, and then at the end talking more the nuts and bolts of MTSS. Amanda VanDerHeyden on the podcast. I really appreciate you coming here. I feel like you're supporting me because a lot of people are going to come listen. They've been wanting to listen to you. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed our talk.
No, I'm so happy to meet you. I'm a little bit of a fan. So this is very cool. I don't think that's true that people are going to listen to it just because it's me. I think people will hear me that would not have otherwise because of you.
Well, there you go. And I hope we can work on something in the future together. To the listeners, thank you for tuning in. We've got a lot more episodes coming up this season, and how many I could squeeze in between all of my crazy projects. So thank you so much for listening.